Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode number 9 of Not Your Average PK. My name is Carissa. I'm your host. I am Not Your Average Pastor's Kid. And today we have a special guest. You may have heard him before on one of our previous episodes, but I'm so excited to introduce Pastor Mike, who's going to be sharing on the podcast today. So why don't you just give a little bit of an intro about who you are for those of the people who don't know you.
Yeah, well, first off, I just want to say thank you for hosting this podcast, and I believe that your voice matters, and I love that you are bridging the gap between culture and the church, and I just think it's awesome. So, for those that don't know me, my name is Mike Moore. I'm married for almost 12 years, and I have two Christy and then two beautiful kids. And so I'm the lead pastor at City Church in upstate New York, and that's pretty much it. Like, that's my life.
Awesome. Yeah. I love Mike and his church over there. We've worked together for a long time and they're awesome over there. So I always love having his insight, his wisdom. I think that he does it really well being a pastor and yet also being a person of the people. So that's why I love to have you on here. So today we're going to be talking about reaching the unchurched. This is today's topic for the podcast. And so I just want to start off with a question and get your insight on it.
Yeah.
So, from your perspective of being a pastor, are there people groups that we, the church or Christians, have deemed unreachable? Or are there also places that we have kind of said are off limits to go to as Christians?
So the short answer is no, no one is unreachable. Yes, we should have limits on where we go. And so I'll try to kind of unpack this
Mm-hmm.
a little bit. And I think that for every individual, it's going to be different. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and and I'll explain. Okay, so no one is unreachable. Some of my best friends were practicing witchcraft whenever they met Jesus, and God radically transformed their lives. And so you look at someone who is maybe really big into the occult, and you might write them off and say like, "Oh, there's no way that God could reach their heart," and that's just not the case. There's
Mm-hmm.
another gentleman that I know. Actually, you've met him before. This guy Adam, who was a Wiccan, and same thing of like he was full blown into witchcraft. Jesus met him. All of his friends said that he was too far gone. Well, now he serves in a fairly high position at a church in leadership, and God
Wow.
has just
Mm-hmm.
completely redeemed and reconciled his life. You also hear of there's a pastor out there, and forgive me, I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was involved into the porn industry, and he met Jesus and he gave everything up, and now he's pastoring. And so I don't think anyone's too far gone. Even looking at
Mm-hmm.
the Apostle Paul was what we would consider a modern day terrorist towards Christians and towards the first century church. And he met Jesus, and Jesus transformed his life. And as Spurgeon says, I believe it was Spurgeon, he says he's the greatest Christian that ever lived. And he went out and he planted so many churches and did so much for the flourishing of the gospel of Jesus. And this is a person who just years before was murdering and arresting and beating Christians in the name of God. And so I
Yeah.
don't think anyone is too far off. The second part of this question, though, I think is really interesting and something that I want to just kind of pry into a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more. Um, are there places we should not go? And I think that's where it gets very personal. And the answer is yes, there are places that we should not go. An example, if you are someone who before Christ, or maybe even as a Christian, you struggled with alcoholism, um, I would not encourage you to go to a bar to try to reach people. Why? Because it's going to be a stumbling place for you, and God forbid that you end up having a moment of weakness, and in the process of you witnessing or sharing your faith to someone, you end up tripping up, and you fall back into an addiction or back into an old habit or a bondage that you were already free from. At the same time, if someone is struggling with pornography, I would not encourage you to go and try to reach people who are in that industry. That being said, God has specifically called each one of us to reach the demographic or the sphere of influence that's around us. And for some people, they are called to reach people that are in the pornography industry, or they are called to reach people who are in the bars, or even with homelessness, people that are involved in homelessness or struggle with mental health issues or drug addiction. And so I really think that it comes back on the individual and what has God placed inside your heart and the burden that God has placed inside your heart. And who are the people that God has called you to reach. And so, Carissa, you're going to reach people in the fashion industry that I would never be able to reach. And I wish I could. Like, I like fashion, but you just have a way of doing it so much better than me. And I may be able to reach people in another demographic that you're not able to reach. And so I really
Yeah.
just think that it depends on the passion and the burden and the calling that God has placed inside each one of our own heart. The caution that I would say is, don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to end up stumbling, and don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to cause others to stumble.
Gotcha. That's good. So it's more up to the individual rather than like a blanket statement of no Christian should ever go here, kind of thing, or no Christian should ever associate with like this particular people group or area or anything. So not so much of a blanket statement, but of a some may and some may not, based off of background and calling.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And just to kind of start this out with, like, as we dive into this topic, can I just read a scripture real quick?
Of course, yeah.
Okay. So we've been in the Gospel of Matthew as a church, and just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I talked about this, and I want to say this: the when someone is called to a particular people group or demographic or um, place or situation that we may seem uncomfortable with, we have to make sure that we are not passing judgment on them, because we have no idea what God is doing through the ministry or through the work of that person. Um, and so this is in Matthew chapter 11, and this is kind of this whole Matthew 10, 11, and 12. There's this huge tension developing between Jesus and the Pharisees. And you really see Jesus kind of have some baller moments here where he's just like, drop mic moments with the Pharisees. I absolutely love, like, I've loved studying these. And but
Yeah.
in Matthew chapter 11, in verse 16, it says, but to what shall I compare this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplace and calling on their playmates. And he's talking to the Pharisees. We played the flute for you and you did not dance. We sang the dirge, if I'm saying that correctly, the song, and you did not mourn. And what he's talking about right there is Jesus is doing these miracles. He's doing these signs. He's reaching people in front of the Pharisees, and they're not responding to the gospel. But then he says this: for John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. And we know John the Baptist was one of the most holy men, according to Jesus, the greatest man that's ever lived outside of himself. But then it says this in verse 19. I think this is interesting. The Son of Man came eating and drinking. And when it's talking about drinking there, it's specifically talking about drinking wine, eating and drinking. And they said, look at him, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. And so I think it's important, if we're called to reach non-believers, we need to go to the places and the spaces and have the conversation with people that the religious leaders may deem unreachable or unholy or unjust. And then he says this: yet wisdom is justified by her deeds, which is simply Jesus saying, like, hey, I'm hanging out with gluttons, I'm hanging out with drunks, I'm enjoying a good meal and a glass of wine. Let my character and let the fruit of my ministry be the judgment of what I do. Judge me by the fruit, because what you're going to see is I'm going into these places and I'm not conforming to them, but in the
Mhm.
process of that taking place, their lives are being transformed because I'm entering these spaces. And I think oftentimes the church is scared to enter into the spaces of non-believers, the spaces
Yes.
that are awkward, the spaces that make people uncomfortable. And then we label people that are in those socioeconomic groups or demographics, and we kind of build this wall instead of tearing down a wall and building a bridge to them. You got
Yeah.
me all fired up right now. Like, sorry.
It's so good. It's so true. I think that the the thing that you said verbatim that I the whole point of me wanting to do this topic is that the church is so afraid to go into these spaces of unbelievers,
Mm-hmm.
and then the people that do and feel called to go there are um, unfairly judged for going
Agreed.
into the spaces. But my question is like, if not us, then who will the spaces be flooded with? If we
Yeah.
don't come in and flood them as Christians, then we just give it all up to the world.
Yeah.
We give it all away to the enemy to have his way and his will and what he wants. And so while we do need to be cautious of where we're going and how we're spending our time based off of things that we're personally convicted by or struggle with,
Absolutely.
we cannot completely rule it out as to just give it over to the world rather than taking dominion over what God has given us dominion over in the whole world
Yeah.
and then sanctifying it through Him.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I hear all the time about places that we're not allowed to go to as Christians and people that we're not allowed to hang out with as Christians. And even from the pulpit, from time to time, I've heard it because I've grown up in church. And
Mm-hmm.
so then people, I think by default, just only hang out with Christians and they only hang out in Christian spaces,
Yep.
which I fear will limit our reach as Christians and as the church. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that about do you feel that we've like limited our reach?
I do. Absolutely. And I just think back to a conversation that I recently had with someone. Um, and I want to say this with a lot of caution, and I don't want to
Mhm.
pass judgment on people in the church, okay? Because I
Yes.
don't know their motives, all right?
Yeah.
But I think about our friends in the LGBTQ community, okay? And we have a few people who identify in that lifestyle that attend City Church, and they know our stance on the biblical view of marriage. And we've had very robust, healthy, God, Christ centered conversations around this, right? And with that, though, I've had parents who have kind of, and this is where I want to be cautious because I don't want to call anybody out, but I've had parents who have had concerns that their kids are being around that. Uh, and my response to that is like, these, first off, these people matter to God. These people
Yeah.
matter to God. And because they matter to God, they should also matter to us. What a
Mhm.
better place for them to come than the church to be able to have conversations around faith. And so if we draw this distinction of saying like, because they live a lifestyle that maybe we don't necessarily agree with, we can't associate with them, we're essentially saying you have no place in the family of God. And that's just not the case. They do have a place in the family of God. Yeah, they have struggles and they have sins just like every one of us. Theirs is just extremely public with that. And so, with the
Mhm.
parents that have had these conversations, I've really challenged their mindset of saying, hey, this is a space where we want people who identify like that to be able to come so that we can have honest conversations with them. And you, as a parent, you need to teach your kids about this from a biblical standpoint, a biblical view. Because if you don't teach your kids, I guarantee you that the school system, culture, and YouTube is going to teach your kids. And so you have an
Yeah.
opportunity at 6, 7, 8 years old to be able to shape the little minds of the boys and girls in your household and to be able to have these conversations and answer their questions and point them back to Christ. And if you step away from that, someone's going to be discipling your kids.
Mhm.
And so like having this conversation, my son who attends public school, and we intentionally want him in public school because
Mhm.
that is it's a decision that we made. We want him around different environments and different people so that we can have these conversations. But he came home and he's like, hey, one of my classmates is identifies as a lesbian, right? And so we were able to talk about that in our house from a Christian perspective and how he's supposed to respond to that and treat that
Mhm.
individual with love and care for them, but also be a witness to them. And so that is just an example of like ostracizing someone to where we say things like, oh, they're not welcome here, or oh, they've got to clean up their act. And man, this is exactly what Jesus was pushing back against with the Pharisees. Jesus
Mhm.
wasn't mad at the prostitute. Jesus wasn't mad at the demon possessed man. Jesus wasn't mad at the tax collector. Jesus got mad at the church. And he got mad at the church because the church said some people can come in and other people are not good enough. And we know that the kingdom of God is for all people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again,
So
you get me
good.
fired up. Like, this is something I'm really passionate about. I don't know if
Yeah.
you noticed that. So
That's exactly why I wanted you to talk about it. So I love it. Yeah, and I think that's really key. So in talking about reaching the unchurched and going to places that are not Christian, people that are not Christian, that opens up the door to a lot of different areas, a lot of different types of places that have different activities going on. And so, how do you then draw the line between legalism and living above reproach? Because some people, if they see you in a certain area or with certain people, could come to certain conclusions that would question your faith or your devotion to God. And sometimes it's wrong and sometimes it's true. So then, how do you come to that balance of, again, living above reproach and legalism?
yeah. So I'm going to give you again a very practical example. All right. And so this is something that I feel from the Lord that He placed on my heart about a year ago, almost a year ago. I
Mm-hmm.
really felt like God said, I want you to get involved in your community, not the church community, but the community that you live in. And I remember talking to Christy about that. And it was maybe 2 weeks later, I got a text message from the president of the Little League about managing a baseball team. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And she's like, we just said God told you to get more involved. And so I stepped into it. And then I got asked to be on the board of the Little League. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And again, Christy, words of wisdom. Christy's my wife, for those that don't know. She was like, I think this is what God is, placing you into.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is specifically about living above reproach. Okay. Um, so I go to my very first board meeting, and there's 20 guys in this boardroom. Some are about to leave. Some are like myself, were joining the board. And out of 20 guys, there was just beer cans everywhere. Everyone's drinking. They're talking baseball. They're cutting up. And here I am with and I kid you not, I had a bubbly seltzer water. Like, I was like, all right, I'm going to rock with my bubbly seltzer water. And no
Yeah.
one but maybe two or three people knew that I was a pastor at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I made a determination in my mind here that I'm going to live above. First off, I should live above reproach all the time, but specifically
Mm-hmm.
in this environment, I'm going to live above reproach because I know it's going to get out what I do and my calling and my passion. And so I decided I'm not going to drink around these guys. And so since then, I've had 24 meetings, both board meetings, committee meetings, different things. And I am not against having a beer, right? But I want to set myself apart from them. And since then, I've had multiple people, even one of the other coaches, just a few weeks, come up to me and said, it sounds like you're the right, not the right guy, you're trying to do the right thing and you're an honorable guy who's trying to live by your
Mm-hmm.
convictions. And I think that's a good example. And again, it's a safe environment. It's little league baseball, right? It's not major leagues. It's not going out to a club or anything like that. And I
Uh-huh.
get that. But it is like, hey, I'm setting myself to this standard, and I'm going to live at this standard because my witness matters to these people.
Mm.
My witness matters to the parents of the players on my team. My witness matters to the assistant coaches that are coaching with me. And in those moments, I want it to be that they know that whenever they have a struggle, or they're experiencing marriage issues, or they're battling sin or temptation, that they can come to me, and that I don't destroy my witness by doing something stupid or saying something stupid. Now, do I slip up and make mistakes? Absolutely. You should have seen me 2 weeks ago at a game. I lost my cool. But that being said, I think that is, in any situation that God calls us in, we really need to ask ourselves, what is the standard? Who am I trying to reach? And what are the things I need to do or not do in order to be effective at the ministry or the people that
Mhm.
God is reaching me towards? And so that is just, again, a very, small, small example. But that's something that I'm kind of been walking through more so recently.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I love that's actually a very practical example. So I like that. It's nothing crazy, but it's easy to follow. So it would be basically the difference of in what setting am I doing this, and am I able to be set apart in these
Yes.
unchurched settings.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So not even a matter of like, is it okay to go, but do I fit in there or do I look different? So that's good. I like that. Yeah, I feel like I often am unsure of where is the line sometimes, because I'm like, in church, I feel like it's just not okay if you are seen in certain areas or with certain people. And there's certain places where you'll find the most unsafe people. You'll find the most people that you need to witness to, the most non Christians. And we're just never in those areas, like even a bar or something like that. Where are you going to find the most amount of people who need Jesus on a Friday night? Probably a bar.
Yeah.
Does that mean that you go out and get drunk with them? No, you are able to be a clear headed, sober minded witness. Um, but if God calls you to be there, not being afraid to be there, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like that's something I've struggled with being in Christian environments, of not understanding like where the line is and when it is okay and when it's not okay. And also just struggling with like fear of judgment, of being in areas where there's not many Christians, even though I feel called and led to be there to be set apart. So that's definitely something that God has been working with in my mind. So I
Yeah.
really appreciate that wisdom.
So, and let me give you one more example. Just in a corporate, I say corporate, that's not the best word. In a corporate church, like in the actual body of a church,
Mm-hmm.
organizationally speaking, and you know these people, but our friends down at the Experience Community Church, they
Mm-hmm.
have a bar ministry, where they go down into the square, um, every Friday night, and they serve free hot dogs and they serve coffee. And they're trying to reach people coming out of bars to sober them up and to give them some caffeine so that they can get home in time, not in time, but home safely. And so you see these pastors, literal pastors, down at these bars serving hot dogs, and it's creating an opportunity for them to witness, about Jesus, share their testimony, and share their story. Are they there to get drunk? No, they're
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
They're there to meet a practical need, and to make sure like these people get home safely. And I just love, us talking to Travis Stevens, um, he's told me numerous times where people have come out and said, "Why are you doing this?" And he's like, "Man, because we love you and Jesus loves you." Like, and it just
Yeah.
creates this opportunity for them to share the gospel. And then the other thing is with, what I would say about all of this is really just check in your own heart is,
Mhm.
what is your motivation? Are you going to these places just to have a good time and have fun? And because, like, I think oftentimes we can say, oh, I'm going to go do XYZ in the name of God, but our motivation is, no, I just want to have a good time. And our
Yeah.
motivation is not in the right place. And that's what Paul and Jesus talk about. Malice is like having that spirit inside of us that's, we're intentionally going to go sin, but we're going to disguise it as something else in the name of God. And
Yeah.
so I think the heart motivation behind it, of like, if we're truly going to these places to reach these people groups, I think that is the pure motivation of God. If we're going into these places to have a good time and we just use the Christian label to make it excusable, I think um, that is really taking the grace of God and honestly just wasting it away.
Yeah, taking advantage of it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know even for myself a lot of times, even just being in those spaces and not acting in the same way has in itself been a witness without me having to say anything. Or I think about even the parties that I've thrown, like birthday parties, Christmas parties, or anything, and people used to say to me like, "Wow, Carissa, you're the only person I know who can throw a party without alcohol and it still be fun."
yeah,
And this is like back in high school too, so it's not even like nobody's of age anyways, but they were shocked by it, and then they'll say the same thing about me, like, "Oh, Carissa, like you're able to have a good time without drinking, like that's so cool," and stuff like that. So it's even in itself being set apart
yeah,
is a witness as well, and
yeah.
I think will um reflect who you
Absolutely.
serve. So,
Absolutely.
and I even remember a story that someone told me recently about a saint, and this is related to everything that we've been talking about. And they said that the saint used to every, I don't know if it was every night or every certain night or something, they would go into a brothel and they would witness there, and they didn't tell anybody, so nobody knew why he was going into this brothel every night, but they knew that he was supposed to be a Jesus follower, a Christian. Um, but they just assumed that he was partaking in everything else in the
Mhm.
brothel. So they ridiculed him, they outcast him, they judged him. And then he was actually witnessing to people that were there, and he was getting them out of it and getting them saved. And he never said anything. He never defended himself or anything. And it came to light after he died, all the work that he did in transforming people who were involved in these brothels. And I just thought that was so convicting, just as a church, how quickly we can judge without knowing the whole story, but just judge based off of appearance or perception, um, based off of literally just where you're walking into. And
Mhm.
I think that we should have more, um we of all people have the covering, we of all people have the
Yeah.
protection
Yeah.
and the strength to be able to walk into those places. And if when I look at Jesus's ministry, that's what he did as well. And of course he's perfect, so he never fell, and we're not, so we do still need to be cautious. But
Yeah.
that just really stuck with me. It was very convicting of how quickly am I to judge other people based off of the things that I'm just seeing, maybe on social media, or even just see what stores people can be walking into or whatever. I don't know why they're there. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so I think that we need to be more aware, definitely, as the church, how quickly we are to judge, which can be really hard. And I feel like we answered this kind of already, but I don't know if you have any more insight of, do you think that we do become too Christianized, that we end up only like building other Christians up rather than bringing new Christians in? Do you think, who do you think does this really well? I don't know if you have an example.
Yeah. As far as reaching non-believers,
Mhm.
There are personal friends that I have that do this well. There are churches around the world that do this well. Off like I could think of my friend David, who is
Mhm.
he has a true gift of evangelism, and he can walk into these places and share the gospel and not fall to any temptation.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I do think that people do this well, but he also knows his weaknesses, and with
Yeah.
that, he in his weaknesses he knows where the line is, and not to
Mhm.
put himself in a situation that is going to cause him to stumble. I mean, Jesus even talks about whenever he sends out his disciples, he sends them out two by two. And so I think that's
Mhm.
important to have accountability or someone with us to
Yeah.
allow protection for our own heart, or someone that can, you know, grab our shoulder and say, hey, like, or grab our arm, pull us out of a situation, maybe physically and metaphorically. At the same time, though, and I can talk about this more from an organizational standpoint,
Mhm.
churches that become inwardly focused are setting their path towards death. And I know that's a harsh statement. And here's what I mean. If we become so inwardly focused that we fill our calendars with church activities, we are taking the people of God who, according to Paul in First Timothy, where he says, do the work of the evangelist, and we're putting them into a church environment, and we're not letting them do the work of an evangelist. And so you have Johnny and Sue who are at the church on Sunday, Monday night, Tuesday night prayer meeting, Wednesday night men's Bible study, Thursday night women's Bible study, Friday night youth, and Saturday morning prayer. Well, you've just taken this individual who's called to go and reach their friends and non-believers in their environments, and you've put them in a church bubble, and they're not effectively able to go and witness to people and to share the gospel. That's an inwardly focused church. And so I and you see this, like, there's a church 10 minutes from where our church is, one of the oldest churches in the country, and they became so inwardly focused that over the course of about 20 years they imploded on themselves, and now it's a building that is just rotting away, literally rotting away. A thriving thousands of members in their church, dating all the way back to either the 1500s or the 1600s. They got so focused on them, and they lost focus of the mission of the gospel, which is to go out and make disciples. I think that's important, to go out, like, not to just stay in the church. And for anyone listening,
Mhm.
like, man, if your schedule is nothing but church activities, it may be time to, like, reevaluate your allegiance to the church that you're in. Because if you're so
Mhm.
bogged down with church stuff that you're not focused on reaching non-believers, there's something wrong with that. There is something wrong with that. Um, Now, yeah, the church should do outreaches. The church should um, focus on non-believers, reaching non-believers. And this is something that, and I'm sharing this Sunday, like, and you know this, we try to be very, very simple at City Church. We try not to do a bunch of extra stuff. We're going to do what we can do, and we want to do it well. And we do
Mhm.
that so that people can go out and join baseball little leagues, or go out
Yeah.
and have a drink with their friends on a Friday night, or go
Mhm.
out and watch movies, or go to a birthday party, or go to workplace happy hour, whatever it may be, to where it isn't constantly church, 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 church.
Yeah.
We are shutting down everything for the summer so that people can go out and live their
Yeah.
lives to do what Jesus has called us to do. And but I think because
Mhm.
of that, like, the mission of the gospel is ingrained into people. Um, and we are seeing fruit from that. We're seeing people inviting their neighbors, and their neighbors are showing up. We're seeing people inviting homeless people, and homeless people are showing up. Um,
Yeah.
so it's, yeah. Again, an inwardly focused church. The moment a church becomes inwardly focused, it's the moment that church is headed towards the grave.
I think I
So yeah,
lost you for a second.
yeah. So yeah, all I said was that the moment a church becomes inwardly focused is the moment that church starts to head towards the grave.
Yeah, definitely. 100%. That's so good. And it's funny because I love to hear you talk about making time to reach people who don't know Jesus, because I think so many times, of course, me, I've grown up in church, so I've heard everything under the sun. But I've a lot of times I've even heard people kind of frowning upon you having any unsaved friends at all. And I'm like, well, then how else would they know
Yeah,
Jesus? How else would they know anything about God, anything about church? And sometimes they've even put like a time frame on it. If they're not saved by it, after a year of you being friends with them, then it's time to cut them off. And I've heard so many things of just cut them off, cut this off, which it can sometimes be true depending on the person. But
yeah,
if that's all
absolutely.
we're doing, and all of a sudden we've cut off everything besides the people that we know from church, then we are not winning people to Christ,
Yeah,
because we don't know any people who are not Christians already. So I think it's important to have that balance. And also, we can't put a time frame on it because it's in God's timing, not our own.
yeah,
As long as we're
yeah,
obedient and walking in where He's calling us to, then we have to trust that it will be according to His timeline, and be
yeah,
praying about it as well constantly. Um, but yeah, I've heard everything under the sun. So
yeah. So funny, and it'll just take 30 seconds. Quick story. Literally 2 weeks ago, so 2 Mondays ago, I told our staff I enjoy hanging out with non-Christians more than I do Christians.
hmm
And which may seem like, what? You're a pastor. Why? You should love the church. I do love the church, but non-Christians don't complain. Christians do
hmm
nothing but complain. And like I've so experienced that in the past 2 months. And so yeah, I enjoy hanging out with non-believers because they're there just to have fun and to do life. And but yeah, so I
hmm
can, that's a whole nother topic. But yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you.
yeah. Awesome. Well, any closing comments, questions, anything before we kind of conclude?
Yeah, I would just say the biggest thing is making sure that your heart with non-believers and reaching people is in the
Mhm.
right place, and you're not using grace as a license to sin. And
Yes.
I can't stress that enough. We are called to live above reproach. We are called to live in this world, but not be made up of this world, meaning we
Yeah.
should act different. We should look different. But we are called into those hard places. We
hmm
are called. And then the other thing is just really challenging people like, don't get so busy with so many church activities that you're not living a missional life. Um,
Yeah.
Jesus in Matthew chapter 13 talks about the parable of the sower. We are all called to sow seeds, and that may be in the
hmm
workplace, that may be in schools, that may be in the park, that may be in the bars, that may be in the little league, wherever it is. The responsibility of the gospel and the message of the gospel is on us as the church.
hmm
The outcome is not our responsibility. But
Yeah.
if we compromise our witness by doing stupid stuff or putting ourselves in an environment that is going to cause us to stumble, that is on us. And that's
hmm
something that I just want to encourage everyone with reaching non-believers. Guard your heart. Just guard your
Yeah.
heart.
Awesome. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you everybody for watching, listening. Thank you, Mike, for sharing. It was some great
Absolutely.
insight as always. And so you can catch us. This is the second to last episode of the season, and then we're going to be taking a little bit of a break. But thank you for watching. and praying for you, everyone who's here. I love you and I appreciate you. And as always, I'm open for comments, DMs, messages, and I am here for you. So I hope you all have a great rest of your week. And bye, guys. I love you so much.